and welcome back to Interpreting the Scares! That's right, we're back at it on our month-long journey through the nightmares with yet another film to check off that bucket list of terror. And we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, which means we're talking about some of the most popular horror films ever made that never got sequels. This was a film that I added to the list pretty much as soon as I started making the list because I really wanted to revisit it. And because it's so popular, I couldn't talk about it until now, because remember when I made the list, I sorted it so that the most popular film ended up at the end. That was a really interesting sorting because the least popular talked about films were also really good because they were hidden gems. And now we're talking about more of the blockbuster-esque horror films that pretty much everybody talks about. And today, that's The Cabin in the Woods. 5 teenagers head off for a weekend at a secluded cabin in the woods. They arrive to find that they're quite isolated with no means of communicating with the outside world. When the cellar door flings itself open, they of course go down to investigate. They find an odd assortment of relics, but when one of the women reads from a book, she awakens a family of deadly zombie killers. But there's far more going on than meets the eye. This has got to be one of the, if not the most brilliant horror comedies that I've ever seen. A part of that has to be the fact that in part it's written by Drew Goddard, who also directed it, but it was also written by Joss Whedon, and the two of them have always been pretty clever in the way that they write their films. Joss has always been pretty good at writing subtle meta humor, while Drew Goddard was always really good at fantastic storytelling in a multitude of different genres. But this was actually his directorial debut, and it's fantastic as a directorial debut. Another interesting tidbit that's not all that important, but I always found it interesting, was the fact that they wrote it in like 2-3 days. That's it, which is fascinating given how insanely smart and clever it tends to be when it comes down to the horror genre. It's definitely a love letter to people who are a fan of horror, but also kind of making fun of them at the same time because it is meta. It's the type of movie that I want to just spoil everything because there's so much to talk about that you just can't by giving it a general consensus. So I'm not going to spoil it. You kind of have to see it for yourself, but just know that there's so much going on that multiple viewings, you'll get more out of it. Like for instance this time, because in a previous Interpreting the Scares event, I talked about all the Hellraiser films, I noticed the nod to Hellraiser and Pinhead in this film as well, and I kicked myself for not knowing that before. Some people like to liken this film to The Truman Show, where in The Truman Show you have this one guy being controlled and forced to be the star of a TV show his entire life. This isn't exactly like that, but yes, there is a controlling force watching these people go to this cabin in the woods, and they're slightly controlling their actions in order to get a specific outcome. And I can't tell you anything more than that because, again, it's too spoiler. I mean, that alone is spoilers, but it's hard to explain what the movie is without at least giving you a slight idea. But obviously, even if you just take a look at it like a basic cabin in the woods zombie horror film, you'll obviously recognize that it's kind of sort of being a satire on other cabin in the woods zombie films such as The Evil Dead came to mind, but obviously there's a few other inspirations going on there at the same time. And the more the film plays out, the more you realize what is actually going on. And it is downright brilliant. The final act of the film is one of the best payoffs of any horror films ever made, period. Also, as a sort of Joss Whedon project, a lot of the cast members in this film have worked with him in the past, or will work with him again in the future. It came out in 2012, but it was actually shot in 2009. So the fact that he worked with Chris Hemsworth, who was in the Avengers in the same year, that's besides the point, because he didn't work with him in the Avengers until like a year or two after making this movie. So he worked with him first here, but there's so many other actors in this film that I recognize from other Joss Whedon projects. You got Fran Kranz, who I love. He's the stoner in this film, but he also played kind of the computer nerd in Dollhouse. You got Tom Lenk in this film as a very small role, but you'll recognize him as one of the weird characters in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, at least in like season 4 on, if I'm not mistaken. He played Andrew in Buffy. And I can't go without talking about Amy Acker, who played Winifred, or Fred, in the show Angel, and she did just a great job in that. She was also in the Joss Whedon show Dollhouse, and she was in the movie Much Ado About Nothing. Apart from those actors, you also have Kristen Connolly, Anna Hutchinson, Jesse Williams, Richard Jenkins, Bradley Whitford, and basically the teenagers in this film that go to the cabin in the woods, they all technically play the archetypes that you would typically find in a cabin in the woods scenario. You have the jock, you have the pretty girl, the virgin, and the fool. That's 4. And the scholar, I forgot. And they play the basic archetypes that you find in any cabin in the woods scenario horror film, and they did that on purpose. Again, you're gonna have to watch the film in order to understand why. It's very tongue-in-cheek, it's very smart, it's very clever, and again, the payoff at the end is one of the best that I've ever seen in horror. I don't think I've enjoyed the movie as much as I did the first time I saw it. The second time I saw it, I noticed little things that I missed here and there, and every single time that I've watched it, again, I've appreciated it a little bit more every time. I've noticed little things here and there that I missed before, but the initial experience is still the best that you can get when it comes down to the cabin in the woods. It's just how it is. Let's take a look at my final score for a second, which I rated the cabin in the woods an A-letter grade. Overall score of 93%. 93 out of 100 possible stars. It's funny, it's scary, it's also really, really well shot and edited. It's well enough acted, though I wouldn't give it any kind of awards for the performances. I like the idea and the concept behind everything. If you saw my bias score, that was 100%, meaning that I personally enjoy it that much. I'll rewatch it any given time. I don't mind buying it to own it. I don't mind recommending it to others. It fully keeps me engaged. You know, it's a very, very entertaining film. I don't think it's perfect all around, but it's one of the best horror comedies out there. It's one of the smartest horror comedies out there. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Go check it out. But if you have seen it, please let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And as for YouTube, hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace!